So guys, I have some bad news for you. Depending on what builds you typically run, the Silver Sword is good. Like, really good. Like, better than Frostwolf good. Let's talk about when that is, and we'll talk about what builds you would need to be running for this to be better than Frostwolf, and let's go over some builds that will help you farm this faster. So these are some numbers from Suggemsum, and don't be alarmed, what we need is basically just right here, because the Silver Sword is basically the Boreas Sword. And if you are not running Catalyst, Aether Drive Tonics, blah blah blah, then the Boreas Sword is better than Frostwolf and Pangar. And this is going to be true no matter what playstyle you're playing. This is just the percentage differences here, and this is just using the numbers behind it, the motion values and what these things do to increase our damage. And we could have already told you this sort of thing, but I went ahead and did a dummy DPS sanity check just to help those of you who actually might need that. So how I did this test, we basically did the same build on both weapons. We did 6 Etheric Attunement, 6 Berserker, 6 Cunning, 6 Galvanized, 6 Predator, 6 Tenacious, just because these are all bonuses that will show up in the training grounds. And then I was using the Valiant Overdrive special with the Charged Sword Focus mod, and the reason I was doing that was I wanted to make sure that I had very precise inputs for this DPS test. Wanted to make sure every single hit was the same between each test. So how this combo rotation went then is I basically did 3 heavy attacks twice, then I put down a sword focus, then I do 3 heavy attacks again, put down a sword focus, 3 heavy attacks, then I activate special, sword focus, and then just heavy attack, then sword focus interchangeably. And I did that for 1 full special meter, and then when I ran out of special meter, I kept doing heavy attacks until I got to the end of this sword focus here. So you see I stop about there. One thing you want to note about when you're doing hunting grounds testing is you saw there was some molten buffs here. Make sure not to grab any molten buffs and check your indicators over here. Like, this build is not supposed to have any attack speed whatsoever on it, and if you have an attack speed buff, that likely means there's somebody running conduit or there is a repeater player giving you attack speed, and that could very well affect the test. And another important thing is if you're dealing with crits, you should take like averages of several runs as opposed to just using the average DPS of 1 run. And this is actually a pretty good example of that. You see my worst run with the Silver Sword, we did 3095 DPS, and my best run of the Frostwolf Sword with the same build and everything, we did 3148. And if we left it to this one comparison, then we would say, oh, the Wolf Sword is better than the Silver Sword. When in reality, when we don't have the Aether Drive Tonic, that is not what we see. See, this here was the baseline comparison. We only had the Bond equipped plus the Recruit Lantern, because then this +3 Galvanized is basically not being used on the Silver Sword at all. To be fair, that probably didn't matter here because you would only get like 1% crit chance from the Frostwolf, but the real reason I had to equip a Lantern was so that the Frostwolf UE could shine and show what it can do. Such that, again, even in the baseline test, the best run from the Frostwolf does actually beat the worst run from the Silver Sword. But the results that we get from the just baseline test also carry over into the full build test. And this is even starting with the maximum number of shields that the build allows, which gives Frostwolf a huge advantage here. And from this, we see that the Silver Sword does indeed beat out the Frostwolf Sword when you don't have Aether Drive Tonic on. You can take out the Etheric Attunement for Molten and throw something else on in there as well, but it's going to tell the same story that the Silver Sword does beat Frostwolf on average. That's the important thing, on average. And the numbers we see here, those are the averages across 5 runs, and if we took out the best and worst runs in each case, then we would get about a 200 DPS difference with this testing. I did also note that, seeing as I was using Charged Sword Focus, I did make sure to note when I did have crits. So you can see the Silver Sword's worst run, that was because we only got 1 crit on that run, but it also got the best run. I want to calculate the odds of this actually happening, but I did get a 5 crit run with the Silver Sword. But again, when we are using the Aether Drive Tonic, the Frostwolf Sword is going to be the winner between these two. So what are you missing out on if you don't want to grind this sword? Well, I mean, not really anything. If you use the Urska Sword with the Boreas Bond anyway, as no catalyst being needed, Boreas is still going to be the best option. It is just going to give you an extra perk economy point to put into something else, which would mainly be like Berserker or Overpower. But you are also kind of missing out on that extra healing and other synergies with stuff because of that extra HP. Having extra Revenant Tendrils at no extra cost versus the Boreas Sword is actually really darn good, as well as having extra Tenacious damage with no extra cost over the Boreas Sword. That's just very good and positive for this sword. So the sword is actually good. It's not bad. It's definitely worse than Frostwolf when you have Aether Drive Tonic on though, but otherwise the Boreas Sword is still fine. You don't have to grind this out if you really don't want to, but it is worth it if you end up doing it, because it is an upgrade of the Boreas sword, which is the best DPS Frost sword if you are not running tonics. So the bad news in this is if you're not a catalyst chugging tonic fiend, then you are going to want to farm for the sword. So let me go over some building stuff that will help you do that. So this is kind of the baseline build that I was running. I'll explain this momentarily. We've got the Urska sword with Galvanized and Berserker inside. I was running Avenging Overdrive most of the time. I was swapping the mod around just depending on what I was feeling at the moment in time. And then of course we have the Silver Sword as the bond, and doing the bond with Urska does indeed count for all of your questing. You'll just have to make sure that you rebond it afterward, because every time you upgrade your Silver Sword, it will detach the bond from the Urska sword. I personally lost about 6,000 experience when that happened. And the Omnicell is going to kind of be up to you. You can run Revenant for sure, but it's not too bad to do this in like Radiant Escalation, and if you have Bastion on, that means you can one-shot stuff potentially if you get the Legendary Amp. Even at level 4, I was doing like 10 to 50s, and I was taking up like 3/4 of the Behemoth's health with it. But no matter what, I would suggest running the Skarn Lantern here with Catalyst. And then for the armor pieces here, we are going to have the Shroud Helmet with Overpower inside, the Koshai chest piece with Catalyst inside, the Time Weave Gloves with Predator inside, and the Thrax Boots with Galvanized inside. And then we'll use the typical tonics, Aether Drive, Blitz, Frenzy, and that is going to give us a build with 6 Catalyst, 6 Cunning, 6 Overpower, 6 Predator, 3 Berserker, and 6 Galvanized. And then the Guardian is always going to be on here. It depends on what stage of the quest you're at. It's going to be +1, +2, and then it'll be +3 when you're done. And then for the Galvanized, I don't believe you get Galvanized on here until you're like level 8 or something. So then you're going to have +1 extra Galvanized, so it'll be 7 Galvanized, and then 8 Galvanized when you level up that again. Once you hit 8 Galvanized, I would suggest taking this extra Galvanized off and running a Berserker instead, because the difference between 5 and 6 Galvanized isn't going to be crazy, at least not enough to, you know, leave out an extra 15% damage for. So this is what the end of the build will look like once you are done with all of the questing. It's 6 Berserker, 6 Catalyst, 6 Cunning, 6 Galvanized, 6 Overpower, 6 Predator, and 3 Guardian. So again, you'll just switch this between Galvanized and Berserker depending on, you know, what stage of the sword you're at. But then maybe you're not as good at dodging, you want no Predator on your build, and you don't necessarily want Berserker on that build either. Then I also have a build lined up for that sort of scenario, and we're going to do a similar thing, except for with this Overpower, we are going to put the Galvanized instead. So let's go over this one. It's going to be the Urska sword with Catalyst and Galvanized inside. And again, I'll kind of change these around depending on what I want to play exactly at the time, but then we have the Silver Sword bond. And again, like Revenant would be better typically, but you can also run this in Radiant Escalation, try to get some one-shots with Bastion. And then for the armor pieces, we're going to be running the Shroud Helmet with Overpower inside, the Scrave chest piece with Adrenaline inside, the Boreas Gloves with Tenacious inside, and the Thrax Boots with Galvanized inside. Again, it's the Aether Drive, Blitz, and Frenzy tonic. And then that is going to give us 6 plus Galvanized, 6 Adrenaline, 6 Catalyst, 6 Cunning, 6 Tenacious, 3 Guardian, and 3 Overpower. And then again, I would recommend once this hits +8 Galvanized, then you are going to want to switch this to an Overpower so that you only go down to +5 Galvanized, but then you have the 6 Overpower. So the final version of this build would be 6 Adrenaline, 6 Catalyst, 6 Cunning, 6 Galvanized, 6 Overpower, 6 Tenacious, and 3 Guardian. And then if you don't want to run Catalyst, and that is the main use case of this build in the first place, we can do that same sort of no Predator, no Berserker build on the no Catalyst build. All the armor pieces and cells are the same on this one, it's just we swap this to Molten inside, and then you can put this as pretty much any cell you want to. And during the level up process, you can throw the Galvanized here, such that you will always have 6 plus Galvanized. And then once you hit +8, you can bring it down to a +5 by throwing literally whatever you want in here. And then if you wanted to run the Predator Berserker version of this build without Catalyst, this is one of the few instances where I've actually had to look up a build, because there are only a very select few armor piece combinations that work for this, and the Time Weave chest piece and the Thrax Boots are a requirement for this. So let's go ahead and go over it. We have the Urska sword, and this is going to be Galvanized while you are leveling up, and then it becomes whatever you want it to be afterward. We have the Urska Sword, Galvanized Berserker inside. These change depending on what I'm feeling. And then we have the Silver Sword Bond, the Skarn Lantern with Molten inside. And then for the armor pieces, the easiest version of this to make is going to be this one here. So we are going to have the Shroud Helmet with Overpower inside, the Time Weave Chest with Berserker inside, the Malkarian Gloves with Predator inside, and the Thrax Boots with Galvanized inside, which will give us 6 plus Galvanized, Berserker, Cunning, Overpower, Predator, and then 3 Guardian, 3 Molten, and once you hit 8 Galvanized, you can swap this over to something else. Literally anything else that you want to be here, it can go there. And you can actually use this as a Catalyst build if you want to as well by just doing that. But yeah, very rare instance with this build where I actually had to look up how to build it, because it's very specific. You have to have these 2 specific pieces and then a couple of different other meta pieces. But yeah, there you have it, Silver Sword builds for when you are farming, and it is going to be better than the Frostwolf Sword if you are not running Catalyst. So you might actually end up keeping this sort of thing as your permanent build. Maybe we throw a Pulse in here. You can actually take off one of the Berserkers. You can go double Adrenaline here. This is probably a better option. And yeah, that is kind of bad news for you if you tend to play without Catalyst. Hopefully, based on my reaction to it, they will hopefully nerf how much XP you need from these quests. I wouldn't bank on that happening. You should maybe start working on it at least, see what happens next week. And if by next week nothing changes, then you might as well go ahead and finish it. But yeah, sorry for the good/bad news. Good news is that it is worth it if you spend your time doing it. But the bad news is that you have to do it in the first place. But that is going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. Drop a like for me. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I have been Trevor. I go by TheMrTrails, and I will catch you guys next time.